Our own beloved Dr. Michael Berenbaum famously refers to visiting Poland as being witness to the presence of absence and the absence of presence. The line is lyrical, and I assume it's mostly self-evident. But to flesh it out a bit, he says that you sense and you even conjure when you're there both the convexity and the fullness of Jewish life that was once there but is not, as well as the aching concavity, the emptiness. They're the same thing, but you somehow feel both. There's something similar going on with Israel in 2024, now 2025. It has been endless days since October 7th, and one long day. Different memes have appeared on social media related to this, something like the last year has been the longest day of my life. And such paradoxes abound in Israel, and I sensed for the 9 days that I was there the normalcy of abnormality and the abnormality of normalcy. What do I mean? On the one hand, the pace and the moment-to-moment tone of life there is wonderfully and oddly normal. You witness, on the one hand, the banality of ho-hum shopping outings and public transportation schedules and people going to and from work and school, alongside the normative peak moments like bringing in Shabbat and B'nai Mitzvah and wedding proposals. And it all seems like a society that is well. And the society is well on some meaningful level, which is stunning. Because how could the society be well? It's fighting a war on, depending on how you count, 6 or 7 fronts, including, oh yes, those Houthis from Yemen. My favorite gallows humor that I witnessed when I was in Israel was someone wrote on a poster, remember that I was there during Hanukkah, apparently the Yemenite custom is to light up at 2 in the morning. And so the wellness of the society was both welcome and utterly surprising. I was grateful for the Jewish life force and spirit, which infuses Israeli reality, which forces not only survival and subsistence, but even revelry and creativity and wonder into the crucible of war. But it was also crushing on some level to know that there's no space for extended grief and mourning. There's no time for them not to be well, because there's so much work to do in every family, within every town and settlement, on every border. I liken it to the paradox of my grief. I am, as many of you know, still within the shloshim of my father, and I am rather well. I don't think that's denial. I'm okay. And I'm okay with being okay. And I'm grateful for it. But how can I be okay with my father buried under cold clumps of earth in Westchester, New York? How can both be true? I'm grateful that the tradition pushed me into the paralysis of Shiva, and it also pushed me out of it, into life. The humdrum and the wondrous. Israel's present tense seems to be a macrocosm of my experience of grief. And the absences are also palpable and overwhelming. The abnormalities are all around. I was talking with my cousin Uriel, a 42-year-old true hero of the Jewish people. He's devoting his professional life to building a network of mechinot, year-long pre-army programs, focusing on the very strata of Israeli society that normally do not get sufficient attention. He even built a mechina for the Druze, that unbelievable Arab segment of Israeli society that is powerfully committed to Israel and, yes, to Zionism. Uriel is a wonder. He lives in Kfar Damim, a town in between Jerusalem and Jericho, where he grew up since age 2, after his family was displaced from the Sinai Desert after the Camp David Accords. 2 of his 4 sisters lived there, too, along with his parents. And he said that for much of the first 6 to 8 months after October 7th, there was an exceedingly palpable absence on Kfar Adumim and elsewhere of men between the ages of 18 and 55. They just weren't there. Even in a society as proudly and progressively egalitarian as Israel, where women are fighters and pilots, It was just the case that so many sections of society were bereft of men for months upon months. It was Uriel's wife, Tirzah, the daughter of Kfar Dumim's rabbi, who was an artist and a piano tutor, who literally dug trenches outside their home, which is at the edge of the village, overlooking an empty expanse of undulating hills leading down to the main road to the Dead Sea. It was she and her fellow women who filled and placed the sandbags and spent hours perched in the ditch with weapons, since in the early stages no one really knew if Hamas or other terrorists would infiltrate that far. The men were gone. Uriel, a 42-year-old father of 6, is twice exempt from Miluim reserve duty by age and by number of children. After you have your 5th child, you are no longer obligated to Miluim, no matter your age. And yet, my cousin Uriel has spent over 250 days since October 7th in the army, most of it near or in Lebanon. He already knows the date he's expected to return, this time likely to Syria. He will never say no. Most of his teachers and counselors from the Michinot, and of course so many of his alumni, are also in uniform in harm's way. How does he defend a country and also run a staff and a nonprofit? I always get a certain psychological and spiritual jet lag when I return from Israel. The questions bump around in my head. Am I living with sufficient purpose? Is LA really where the Jews ought to be? It is hard to depart from a land that is pulsating with history and meaning and biblical and medieval and eschatological resonance. And something Uriel told me stopped me in my tracks. I was trying to praise him. I knew he would deflect it. He has no time for sentimentality. He's both too serious and not serious enough to be the recipient of bromides from his American rabbi cousin. He is dead serious on being a true Jewish hero, and he's also unbelievably shticky and sarcastic and wry with a biting, incisive wit. I tried to tell him how much I admired his life and work, building a clan in the Judean desert, reclaiming land that David and Jonathan walked, raising a family overflowing with love for one another and truly for all people, replete with high ethics and expectations of self and others and country, all in rather inhospitable real estate. He cut me off and he said, "You know what, Adam? I think I'm wasting my life here." I said, "Huh? You're a chalutz. You're a pioneer. You're settling the land. You are building Israel's future. You're defending it." He said, "They don't need me here on Kfar Dumim. A generation ago when it was being created, maybe, and my parents came and were pioneers. But I and my entire family could disappear from Kfar Dumim and it wouldn't make an impression. They'd be fine. You know where I'm needed? In the towns and kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope that need to be repopulated and rebuilt. In all the places in the northern 50 kilometers of the country that had been emptied out. I told Tirzah last week, you know what? We just finished building this lovely house. Let's leave it." I don't know what Uriel will do. I don't know what Tirzah will permit. Even a poor tailor is entitled to some happiness, and even a Jewish hero is entitled to some stability, right? Entitled to just live and work and play and cook dinner and raise children, and not to have to carry a nation's rebirth on his individual shoulders. I don't know if he'll stay in Kfar Dumim, or if he'll leave the house that he waited for and earned and built and go rebuild the national fabric by bringing his family to Be'eri or Kfar Aza or Metula. But I know this: to spend time with him and those like him is to force yourself at least to ask, what is my purpose in life and in service to the Jewish people? Am I doing enough? And if not yet, what's next? A few more images from my trip, much shorter. You know the stereotype of the Israeli male voice, deep and masculine, exemplifying strength? I think it's a real thing. No one tells the 18-year-olds to start talking in a basso profundo. But it happens. And I wonder if it comes along with a heavy burden of army service and defending a nation. I saw my cousin Michael, Uriel's nephew. When he was younger, he was gentle, sweet, preternaturally smart, and he was socially awkward. He struggled a bit, as adolescents do. I remember long talks with his mother Abigail about what would be for him. His voice was tender and even thin. Now he's 19, with a very important job in military intelligence. He always thought he'd be a fighter, but he realized that using his intellect over his now rather substantial brawn could be a more important contribution to Israel. He confronts things I can't imagine, with stakes unbelievably high. He's 19. He's still gentle, but strong, still sweet and delicate, but also confident and evincing a certain prowess. And his voice is deep and low and sonorous and very, very Israeli. And I just don't think it's only the natural maturation of his vocal cords. I think it's the voice of the soldier still fighting the war of independence. I shared a bit of what and whom I saw on this trip, but you know whom else I saw, particularly among the tourists? And by the way, all the power to them. I saw what we might call the Nouveau Haredi, or maybe the Yeshivish crowd. Not Hasidic, but significantly firmer, say, than B'nai David Orthodoxy. They were everywhere, in their New York-tinged English, even if they were not New Yorkers. They were there in droves. And guess who was not? Us. I did run into some Beth Am folks, some of whom are here today, which was lovely, and a few colleagues there doing bar mitzvah trips for their members. But the overwhelming sense, especially in Jerusalem, is that the ones who spent their dollars and their vacations in Israel, despite or dafka because of the wars and the threats, was the yeshivish firmer crowd. They're just going to come, no matter the circumstances. I admire that. And I don't at all fault the decision we made months ago to push off the Pressman Middle School trip and the parent delegation to next year. 3 classes are going to go next year, and it's going to be amazing. We made a reasonable decision with the information we had, and we tried as hard as we possibly could to make it happen. There's no tisk-tisk. But my message to all of us, to you, if you can, if you have the resources, and even if it's a stretch, whether to go to volunteer or to visit friends and family or just a tour and vacation, Israel needs Jews and Zionists like us, now more than ever, to fill the hotels and the restaurants, to create an impression, to reclaim our place in the Zionist theater in meaningful numbers, especially as so many haters are biting at our heels. So after Shabbat, look at your calendar, and if you can, book a ticket. Now, this is my first time as a religious halachic avel, mourner. I'm a regular davener, and I love going to minyan anywhere and everywhere, but this is the first time that I'm religiously obligated to search out a minyan 3 times a day. I think I said Kaddish in about 15 different individual settings and shuls on the short trip, including once on a bus, once in the shul on Masada, once at a place called Shtiblach in the Katamo neighborhood of Jerusalem, which is essentially a minyan factory. It's like a rabbit warren of endless rooms off of rooms with a minyan starting in one of them every 10 minutes or so. Pulling back from all that, what I feel mostly, and more powerfully than I usually do, is an appreciation for all Jews, even and especially those who are very different from me, ones that in my more small-minded moments I can all too easily judge or distance myself from. It's not a good instinct, but we all have a version of it. But for now, to repeat words that I said in my eulogy for my father, Modeh Ani, I am grateful for all of them, for welcoming me, and for the commitment to religious life and prayer that incubates a community that is just there for you when you're most in need. And yes, I'm aware that I have the unearned privilege of being male, allowing me in, and allowing me to lead, and allowing me to say an unwhispered Kaddish anywhere I want. I know that a female in my position would have a different experience. But that reality and that awareness does not sour my experience and my appreciation. I had a brief exchange in Israel with a colleague, a man who is learned, and I admire him, his intellect and his ethics. He was saying that he will never daven in a non-egalitarian minyan. He will never claim that very privilege he has as a man if it's a place where his female colleague or friend could not be equally welcomed. He would prefer to daven alone. Now, I don't know if he's ever been in mourning since he took this stance, and whether he would temper it if he were looking for a minyan, and I admire his conviction. I'd like to think that I've shown with my actions, my decisions, my leadership and positions that I'm proudly and unapologetically committed to traditional egalitarian Judaism. But I take a different stance than he does. All I have right now is appreciation for the myriad Judaisms in Israel and beyond, the very kaleidoscope of which I'm proud to represent one or two hues. And yes, I'm grateful to the Jews who live so religiously and so strictly and less modernly than you and I do, but who thus cultivate innumerable spaces where one can arrive with no need for a heads up or RSVP and discharge your own Jewish duties. As I scrambled to gather a minyan at Ben Gurion Airport before my flight home, we almost had 10 in the small shul there. I ran out to that circular seating area where I had seen an old USY friend named Ephraim Edelman and his family. And I asked if he and his son Avishai could come and help make the minyan. And as I was standing there, I told his wife and daughter, whom I care for a lot, and who would do anything to help make a minyan, that I felt truly bad that given the setting, I could not invite them to help make the 10. They smiled and they sent me off to go say Kaddish, as they know, just as I know deep in my heart, that it's hard, if not impossible, to live out every principle you stand by every minute. I couldn't fight in that moment, in that setting. And I know I was forgiven. And the very frum people who made that minyan in the airport are my people too, just as I want them to see me as their people. Minyan was over, and then I could go back to advocating and fighting for the traditional egalitarian Judaism that we are so blessed and privileged and hopefully committed to be living. Which brings me to the Torah and Parshat Vayigash. When Yosef reveals himself and reunites with his brothers, the pathos is overwhelming. Vayipol al savarei Binyamin achiv. He fell on the neck of his brother Benjamin. Vayefk, and he wept. Ubenyamin bacha al savarav. And Benjamin wept on his neck. Rabbi Yechiel of Kuzmir, a Hasidic sage, wonders why they are crying. And he quotes Rashi, who, as Rashi often does, leaves aside the obvious emotionality of a scene, and he goes a bit more wonky. Rashi says that Yosef is crying because of the 2 temples that would be built in the territory of Benjamin in Jerusalem, and which would be destroyed. And Benjamin cried for the Mishkan, the traveling tabernacle, that would be erected in Shiloh, in Yosef's territory, which also would be broken down. And Rabbi Yecheskel asked, why are they crying if it's a moment of joy? Why introduce future calamity into celebration? And why are they crying about the other one's loss within their territory and not their own? I'll share with you my answer to his questions and then his. My answer is that in life, and especially in Jewish life and Israeli life, calamity and celebration are bedfellows. There's no disentangling them. We cry at weddings. We laugh at funerals. Uriel jokes as he marches off to war. There's no peace, no normalcy. And somehow we create peace and normalcy everywhere we can. It's all one. And so I get Yosef's and Benjamin's tears. And Rabbi Yecheskel's answer is that Yosef and Benjamin saw with prophetic vision that the temple would be destroyed by sinat chinam, senseless hatred amongst brothers within the nation. And they remembered that their own decades of separation began with such infighting. Destruction came from such division. They were guilty of it. The jealousy, the judgment. And so they cried. And they were now committed to healing it. And so they cried. In Rabbi Yechezkel's words, the repair for senseless hatred is the strengthening of reciprocal love. To know that the pain and reality of the other hurts you as much as your own pain does. I'm moved by his teaching, and I feel deeply embedded within and grateful for and committed to the wide and varied tapestry of the Jewish people, attempting as much as possible to replace judgment and derision and separation with openness, willingness, love, and presence. And there's so much emotion tied up in that at times it does bring me close to tears. Tears for my father, for Uriel, for my cousin Michael, the 19-year-old, for Tirza, for every member of our people who's trying to do his or her part to keep us here and there and alive and well. Am Yisrael Chai and Shabbat Shalom.